Welcome everyone to MarshWatch number 2. This is the second webinar in the series. Today we're going to be covering a little intro to bird ID as well as our first species. If you happen to miss last week's, it has been recorded and it is posted online, so you can always go and check that out. And I'll just advance my slides here. Before I get started, I would just like to say that I am joining you today from Saskatoon, which is located in Treaty 6 territory, which encompasses the traditional lands of the Cree, Dakota, Nakota, Saulteaux, and Stoney First Nation, as well as the homeland of the Métis people. I, of course, am your host, Leanne Latremoy, and those of you who were attending last week or who watched the recording know that I am super passionate about wetlands. I have done a lot of work in wetlands throughout my career at Birds Canada, which has been a ton of fun. I've worked in Southern Ontario in wetlands, a little bit in the Maritimes, doing a few surveys there, as well as, of course, on the prairies. I came to Saskatoon in 2012 to do some summer field work, and of course I fell in love with the place. If you love wetlands, the prairies and the Pothole region is just a fantastic place. Birds Canada, if you aren't already familiar with us, we're a national charity, and we're also a nonprofit. We have a mission to drive action to increase the understanding, appreciation, and conservation of birds in Canada. And through educational webinars like this, we hope that we can help you increase your understanding and maybe your appreciation for wetland birds. Okay, our agenda for tonight, I'm just going to do a very, very brief recap of what MarshWatch is, because I know there are several people who weren't able to tune in last week and who might not have had a chance to watch the webinar. We're also going to do a quick overview of bird ID basics, and this is going to give me a chance to talk about some kind of duck-specific things as well. So we'll be doing that, and we're going to cover some birds and amphibians. That portion is all going to be recorded. Then I'm going to stop the recording, and I will launch our very first in-webinar quiz, and then we can chit-chat, have discussion, and there'll be an exit poll to let me know how many of you were watching, and if you want to let me know where you're tuning in from. All of that information is really helpful for us to know how many people are tuning in and if we're, who we're reaching and where they might be. So, quick overview, MarshWatch is an introductory program. We launched it last year, and we're happy to be offering it again. This is Birds and Amphibians by Sight and Sound, and it's a slow drip. It's, identification at a slow pace, so hopefully you're not going to be too overwhelmed, and, it's just going to be enough species that you'll be able to retain stuff and maybe even get out and practice in between. This is definitely a prairie-focused program, but a lot of these species are found, across Canada and across North America. So the ones that are prairie specific, you might be, brushing up for a prairie visit, or you'd be in a great place to recognize some rarities in your own neck of the woods. There'll be weekly webinars and they'll all be recorded and posted online. I try to get them up within, 24 to 48 hours after the webinar. We're going to do those quizzes. Both the ones in the webinar, and there's also some online on the MarshWatch website. There's a link to that at the end of the presentation today, but you can see there's already people that have been doing them recently, so that's exciting. So there's all kinds of quizzes there. We'll also be doing some guided walks in Saskatoon and Manitoba. So far, for sure, I'm going to be doing Saskatoon, Regina, Brandon, likely Prince Albert again, but I'm also open to requests. So if you want to shoot me an email and you say, hey, I have a group of people who, would love a guided wetland walk, we're going to be doing those in kind of June, July month. So let me know. I'm open to requests. I don't think I have any funding to go to Alberta this year, but maybe we can change that for next year. So far it's keeping it to Saskatchewan and Manitoba. And the goal of this program, we're going to help you get ready to submit a checklist from a wetland of your choosing, or many wetlands, in the month of June and July. And if you're in a region where the marsh monitoring program is up and running, this can also act as a really great, refresher and learning tool for getting your marsh birds down pat. We do have a cancellation plan, so in the event that I need to cancel a webinar, I will be sending out an email as soon as possible, and we'll just have a standing reschedule date. So the reschedule date will always be Friday at 7 p.m. You'll get an email reminder 1 hour before, and probably you'll get you should be getting a cancellation email sent out. So that will happen in the off chance that I need to cancel a webinar unexpectedly. And with that, we're going to jump right into a little bit about bird ID. There's a few basics that we use to identify birds and essentially everything else in our lives. So that's shape, size, context, coloration, and sound. Shape can be really useful, especially in marsh birds. Sometimes they're at a distance away and you really can't get much in terms of, coloration or anything else on the bird. You could just kind of see this, shape in the distance. Or like, this morning sunrise picture, these birds might be terribly, underlit or backlit at sunset. So the shape can be really helpful. So, think about what shape is the bill. All of these birds have a relatively long bill, but even the shapes within those relatively long bills in these species are different. We have a long straight bill, we have a fine long bill that's slightly upcurved, and then we have a big wedge-shaped bill. So shape can be really useful. Body shape, leg size, use relative proportions on the bird. Is the bill like 2 times as long as the head length, or is it about the same length as the head? Those sorts of things. Keep in mind, though, that birds, like people, can change their posture, and they have the ability to move their feathers and change their feather position. And this can be to keep warm in the winter, or to signal aggression, or other things. So just keep that in mind, because birds can look a little bit different based on what they're doing. So on the left hand, we have a great blue heron, which often has its great long neck outstretched, but it can hunch it in and just kind of stand there on the shore. And it really changes the overall shape and appearance of this bird. American robins, you've probably seen them when it gets a little bit chilly out. They can turn into a blob bird. They puff up their feathers, and this traps air, in between their body and their feathers. And exactly like a down jacket, this helps to keep, the temperature regulated for the robin so it doesn't get too cold. And the blue jay is a great example of a bird that has a prominent crest, but depending on, what the bird is doing and what it might be trying to signal to others, it might be lowering or raising that crest. So just keep that in mind, especially if you're really into photography. Not everybody looks great when you snap a photo because maybe they were moving, they were mid-yawn. Sometimes you catch people in these weird poses and positions with the photograph. The same is true for birds. So just keep that in mind, that if you see the photo, the bird might be in action and it might look a little bit odd. Size is a really great thing to compare to, but it's not so much, oh, this bird is 12 centimeters long and this one is 13. Trust me, you're not going to be able to tell the difference unless you have the bird in hand and you're measuring it. But use relative size, comparing it to birds that, is it a really big bird like a goose, or is it a really small bird like a sparrow, or is it smaller than a sparrow, a robin? These are just examples that most people are familiar with if you've ever used the Merlin app from Cornell. These are just kind of the size markers, because these are really, generally pretty familiar birds to most people. So use that relative size as kind of a gauge. You can often get this in a flock of ducks, where if there's a bunch of them and a bunch of different species together, you can get a sense where, oh, okay, these ones are quite large, these ones are a little bit smaller, and it's that relative size. If it's just a duck out alone by itself, that is a little bit tougher to tell. Context, this gives me a great opportunity to talk about behavior and how that can help get you to where you need to. So there are two kind of categories of ducks. We have the dabblers and we have the divers. And dabblers are ducks like the mallard, like the blue-winged teal. These guys tip up or they feed at the surface. So I'm sure a lot of you have seen this, especially if you're, driving down a grid road and there's a wetland by the prairie and you see all these little duck bums stuck up in the air. Well, these are dabbling ducks. They feed kind of just below the surface or right at the surface. They're really good at walking on land. They have their legs kind of centrally located on their body, and they tend to nest in the upland habitats. They'll bring their kids to the water, but they tend to make their nests up a little bit on drier land. And they can fly from a standstill. This happens to me a lot because I tend to walk a lot of pastures near wetlands, and a duck will just explode out from under you. You know for sure that that's a dabbler because it has the capability of flying from a standstill. So, this is good behavior clues to kind of get an idea for, okay, maybe I have a dabbling duck. Divers, on the other hand, like their name suggests, they're really expert at diving underwater and getting their food. So you'll often, it'll be hard to count a group of divers because, one moment there'll be three, and next there'll be one, then you'll see five. They're all diving and coming up at various different times. So they dive below the water surface in search of things like fish, amphibians, little tiny critters that swim around in the water. Some of them are vegetarian and they'll go after tubers and things underwater as well. But they're really built for life, underwater as well as in the air. So they have their legs far back on their body, and this helps them with propulsion, but it also makes them really terrible at walking on land. So you're not going to see these ducks, out in a pasture or out in a field somewhere. They're going to be building their nests either right above the water or just adjacent to it. So they can get out of the water and move around a bit, but it's much harder for them to do than the dabblers. They also need a runway to fly because they're so adapted to going underwater. Their wings are less broad. They're kind of reduced compared to their body size. So they have a different wing loading. And this means that they can't fly from a standstill, and they actually need a runway to fly. So they get up and they run, and they paddle their little feet and they flap their wings until they finally get airborne. So those are some of the behavior clues that can help you separate the ducks. So if you're looking at a pile of ducks in the distance, and this happens sometimes, they're 100 meters away and you don't have, a hope at figuring out what they are because you can't really see much other than their behavior and what they're doing. So if there's a bunch of ducks that are, diving under the water, you can at least say, hey, there's a bunch of divers out there. Or, it's a mix. There's dabblers and divers. So these are some of the behavior clues that can help you immediately separate the ducks. Coloration, of course, is important, and on ducks specifically, we often talk about the speculum, and this is especially true for dabbling ducks because they tend to have a more brightly colored speculum. And these are these feathers right here. These are the secondary feathers, and in the dabbling ducks, they're usually some, pattern of bright colors or shiny colors are quite beautiful. So this is the speculum here. Some of them have a forewing patch like this blue wing teal here, as well as a colorful speculum. So just keep that in mind. The wing patterns, especially on the dabbling ducks, can be really useful. So you can see this in flight, but sometimes you can also see a little patch of it sticking out, as they're swimming around, or especially if the bird, stretches or is preening their feathers, you can take a look at the speculum. There's also quite a bit of seasonal variation in ducks. Most of us, I think, maybe are familiar with songbirds that have a breeding plumage and a non-breeding plumage, and most of the time while they're up here in North America, they're here looking their best, and then, sometimes they'll be molting in the fall and they'll be going, oh no, we've got a bunch of tricky fall warblers. Well, the seasonal variation in ducks is also there, but the timing's a little bit different. So their breeding plumage, they're in that from kind of October till about the month of June. And in late summer to early fall, this is when the ducks are in what is called eclipse plumage, or their non-breeding plumage. And ducks will do this, they will molt all of their flight feathers all at once, or relatively all at once, making them flightless. So this leaves them quite vulnerable. So in the winter, or in the eclipse season, the males are going to adopt a more female-like drab plumage. So they'll molt all their body feathers, they'll take on a more female-like appearance, and they're flightless. Oftentimes they'll go to these kind of secluded wetlands, and you'll just see this gigantic bachelor group of male ducks who are all flightless, and they find these secluded little places because they're really quite vulnerable at this time. The females do this as well, but it's a much less dramatic change in plumage because they're already fairly drab, they're already pretty camouflaged, but during this time they are also flightless. But they also have their young with them at this time, and the young are also flightless. And so you'll often see, these females who are trying to steer you away from their ducklings. They'll do this broken wing act in the water. They can't actually fly, so they're going to try to, get you away from their kids by kind of, running away and flapping their wings in the water. So just to note that there is a part of the summer where the males look a little bit wonky, as they're molting into and out of this eclipse plumage. They have all kinds of, bits of their regular plumage on. So there is a season where the male ducks look kind of drab and kind of strange. But this is the seasonal variation that we're dealing with for the waterfowl. And last but not least, sound. And some questions that I get asked a lot are, why do birds sing? What do they mean when they're singing and they're saying something? Well, I think most of us can get this. They're trying to attract a mate. They're trying to signal, hello, ladies, I am here. Listen to my beautiful song. Aren't I just a specimen of my species? So I think that one's a little bit easy for us to wrap our heads around. But they also do this to defend territories. They're basically saying, hey, this is mine. Other red-winged blackbirds, stay out. Like, this is my little territory. And some species will go and they'll sing around the edges of their territory. So, oftentimes they're signaling, hey, looking for love, but also other dudes, stay out of my territory. This is my area. Another thing that birds will do is they'll make call noises and they'll alert each other to danger. This isn't often their song. This isn't like a nice melodious thing, but it's an alarm call. And alarm calls often get a lot of birds in the area just up on the alert. There's a predator of some sort around. So this is another reason why birds make noise. It's not quite a song, it's more of a call. And last but not least, sound is actually really great for identification purposes, especially those breeding songs. So if we learn their songs, we can actually, know the species that are around us. And I remember the first time I did it, I felt like a magician because I was walking through, a wooded area and I had finally learned enough of my bird calls in Southern Ontario where I was working for the summer. I wasn't working in the forest. I was doing the marsh bird stuff, but it was amazing that, I could hear, a blue jay, a cardinal, there was a red-eyed vireo, there was a chickadee, and I didn't see any of those birds. It was just incredible to feel like I had these magic powers that I could tell you, oh, there's a blue jay over there somewhere, there's a chickadee over here, there's a cardinal singing. It was just the coolest thing because bird watching doesn't quite look like this. It looks a lot more like this most of the time. Birds are often far away, and so we can hear them from a greater distance that we can see and identify them. So sound is really great, and hopefully through this program, you're going to be learning your visual ID as well as your songs and calls at the same time, mostly focusing on the songs. Okay, with that, we're going to cover some birds and frogs today. We're going to cover the Canada goose, the mallard, the northern shoveler, the yellow-headed blackbird, the red-winged blackbird, and the Sora for our birds. And then we've got two frogs. We've got the boreal chorus frog and the wood frog. So let's dive right in. I don't think this is a goose that needs too much of an introduction. It's going to be pretty familiar to hopefully all of you. It's a fairly large bird, as you know. There is some variation in the subspecies, but overall it's a fairly large, chunky bird, right? This isn't a small duck or anything. Both sexes look the same. They've got, this black head and neck, this white chin strap, brown body, and white rear end, and they've got a dark little tail on the end there. You might also see some variations, like this bird down here has a bit of a white stripe on its forehead, and there's just some variation that happens with Canada geese, but, by and large, that kind of black head and neck with that lovely little chin strap. I'm assuming most people are going to be pretty comfortable with their calls, but they do a lot of honking calls. So here is just one bird. Oh no, I guess my highlighter doesn't allow me to click. Okay. So hopefully this is a sound that maybe some of you are hearing in Saskatoon. Canada geese have been, pouring back in more recently. We got like pairs of them flying over the city a fair bit, so it's nice to start hearing that. And here's what a lot of Canada geese sound like. You're going to find Canada geese hanging out in wetlands, lakes, rivers. They're quite happy in urban settings near water. So, here in Saskatoon, we have all kinds of them down by the river. Here in Regina, Wascana Park is just full of Canada geese. I don't even know that they need to mow the lawn there. The Canada geese might just keep the lawn pretty well cropped. They're, they're a nice looking bird. They can be a little bit territorial sometimes, but they're not as mean as I think the internet makes them out to be. So you'll find them oftentimes in areas with open water and plenty of grazing opportunity. In flight, they just kind of have this nice kind of fade, you know, reddish, brownish wing fading to dark. They eat all kinds of things like grasses, sedges, other plants. They'll go after berries and seeds in the fall and winter, and they'll also feed on agricultural grains in the fall and winter. And, some of them stick around for a fair bit of the winter. If there's not a ton of snow and they can still access areas to graze, they'll hang out for a fair bit of the winter. Their little guys are pretty adorable. They're precocial, meaning that they're born pretty much ready to go within a couple of hours. They'll be, dried off and little fuzzballs running around. So that is the Canada goose. You'll find it across much of North America, east or west. There's a few places where we have less of them, but by and large, there are Canada geese all over the place. Next up, another one that I'm hoping most people are going to be familiar with is the mallard. It's a fairly large dabbling duck. And I guess just a little bit of extra terminology. In the waterfowl world, the males are known as drakes and the females are known as hens. So I've got the drake listed here. So he's got a nice iridescent green head. And the cool thing about iridescent colors is it's a structural thing by and large. So that really depends on how the light is hitting the bird and how that light is reflected back to your eye. So you can see on the back of the mallard's head here, it appears dark, but that's just because the lighting isn't quite right on it. And so it appears dark. So you can see mallards that, depending on the way they're looking or the time of day even, sometimes their head looks quite dark. There is on occasion a little bit of a blue shine in it, and very, very rarely there is some mallards that tend to have just a shiny blue head, and that is, I think related to diet, but I'm not sure if it's totally understood why there's a few that have kind of more bluish heads, but by and large, this is our green-headed duck. It's got a nice white collar, and on waterfowl especially, white is a really, really good color to pay attention to. Oftentimes, they're at a distance, maybe the light's not great, and white really stands out in those low light conditions. You know, color is reflected back to your eye, and there's different wavelengths that come at you. So the brown feathers is going to be wavelengths that come back to your eye and make that brown color. For white, it's all of the wavelengths that are coming back to hit your eye. So it's the most amount of light that is being reflected off the bird. So white really does have this amazing way of standing out, especially at a distance. So that nice little white collar, they're going to be the only one that has that nice fancy little white collar. They've got a bright yellow bill, brownish kind of chestnut breast. They have these nice curly tail feathers that are often visible here on the rear end, grayish flanks, and kind of a white tail on a black rump. The speculum is bordered blue with black and white above and below on both sexes. So it's quite a nice little patch of color there. That white is quite bold and quite thick as well. And the mallards really do kind of your standard, what you might think of as a duck quack. Unfortunately, there's lots of other female ducks of other species that have very similar quacks, so don't put too much stock in trying to learn the mallard call, but do know that, quacking usually means a duck of some sort, potentially a mallard. And mallards are pretty cosmopolitan. You'll find them pretty much in any wet habitat. If you've got a ditch that has a puddle near it, you might have mallards hanging out there. I've seen them nesting in yards because the females will walk along and walk their kids out to the water somewhere. So you'll find mallards in a wide variety of habitats. They're definitely one of these dabbling ducks that, can motor around and get going on land. The hens are much more drab and much more mottled. And this is because, they're the ones that are going to be incubating the eggs and taking care of the young. So they really don't want to wave around a great big flag that says, hello, look at me, I'm tasty. So they really do a good job of, being mottled and brownish. You'll see this for all of the dabbling hens. They're very, that speckly coloration, lots of browns, lots of kind of buffy brown beige tones in them. And this is really good for camouflage. She's got a nice orange bill. It's got a dark center. Oftentimes it's got a black saddle. You can see that really well on this photo here in the lower left-hand corner. So kind of this orangey bill with a dark saddle across it. But sometimes that saddle is not quite complete. Sometimes it's rather speckly looking. Sometimes it has a little bit less speckles, but overall a fairly orange bill. There's a fine dark line through the eye, and her head tends to be a little bit cooler in color tone than the rest of her body. The rest of the body is a little bit warmer. You can kind of see a distinction here between the neck and the head. So the head is just a little bit, of a cooler gray tone, and it's a bit warmer brown on the body. You can see that nice little speculum of hers in a few of these shots here. Here, her feathers on the side of her body are kind of hiding it, but you can just see that blue poking out with the white on either side, as well as in these other photos here on the ground. Both the males and females have lovely orange feet as well. These guys are surface feeders because they're dabblers. They eat at the surface or they tip up. They'll eat aquatic invertebrates, including snail larvae, insect larvae, snails, freshwater shrimp, seeds of wetland plants. They'll eat aquatic vegetation like duckweed, as well as agricultural crops. So you can see them oftentimes in corn and pea fields, you know, in the fall, in a variety of agricultural habitats. And the mallard is one of two ancestors of the domestic duck. So sometimes you'll actually see some crosses or even some domesticated mallards that are out with some wild mallards, and they'll often have slightly different shape to them. Their rear end kind of hangs down a fair bit, and some of them will have these little pom-poms on the back of their head or just be different colors entirely. So keep that in mind if you ever see a strange looking duck. It might be one of those domestic mallards. Fairly widespread species. And next up, we have our northern shoveler. So this is the other kind of green-headed duck. It's medium-sized. It's a little bit smaller than the mallard. It's got this great big honking shovel-like bill. It's really, really quite exaggerated. It doesn't always show up in photos the best, but when you see this duck in person, it's quite a massive bill on this bird's face. So the drake has this lovely iridescent green head. Overall, it tends a bit darker than the mallard. It's not quite as, shiny green all over. There's definitely a bit more black undertones to that iridescence. Have this nice yellow eye. And the thing that really stands out, the thing that I look for when I've got a bunch of ducks at a distance is, these white sides with this big rusty patch on the side. It's really, it really does stand out quite a bit at a distance. So that rusty patch on that otherwise white flank over here, that whole side, imagine is nice and white, and then you've got this dark kind of rusty chestnut patch. The bill is black in the drakes, and they have this powdery blue wing patch, which is really pretty when they're flying. So they got this nice blue, little bit of a white border down here, and otherwise the speculum is this kind of dark iridescent green color. Similar on the hens, but she doesn't have that powdery blue patch. This is one duck that has a fairly distinct call, and I really quite like this call. It kind of goes like a suk 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 suk, and they'll often do this a fair bit as they're flying. So have a listen. So it's that suk 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 suk. And don't worry, we're going to go over all of the sounds at the end again. Play it once more because it goes pretty quick. That really suk 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 suk. And like I said, they do that a fair bit as they're flying around. The hens, on the other hand, again, quite drab, quite mottled, fairly brown, but she also has this great big honkin' shovel-shaped bill. It's a little bit similar to the mallards in that it's kind of orange. It's got a bit more of an olive center. There isn't these splotches or saddle on it, but really it is just a very big, it's like a shoehorn on the end of a duck. It is quite impressive to see it in person. Otherwise, she's fairly plain. She doesn't really have a ton going on the face that's really distinctive. It's harder on the hen when she's floating around to see that speculum patch. I find it's a lot less visible on the northern shoveler hens, but you can see it every once in a while if they're preening. You can get this nice kind of greenish with that white border on the top there. Really great big bill. Even the little guys, even their ducklings have this oversized bill on them. And this is another one that you'll find in sort of any wet habitat. They're also fond of puddles in the ditch, especially in the start of the season. So, quite a common bird, but it is a bit more of a Western species. Let's take a look at that bill up close. These guys are surface feeders, but they also have this, these neat little lamella on the bill, and that's used for filter feeding. So they'll, grab a bunch of surface stuff and the water drips out, but all the little, critters, all the bugs, all of the copepods and all those great things, duckweed, that'll all get caught in the bill and they can, snack on those. So you'll often see them, swimming around and dabbling at the surface, getting small invertebrates, seeds, and plant remains as well. So that is the northern shoveler bill up close. You can see again, the drake really just stands out with this like white side and this rusty patch on it. It is really like, that's my go-to. If I can immediately know what it is if I see that white side and that rusty patch at a distance. There's no other duck that's going to have that. It is a bit more of a western species, but I'm sure the odd one shows up in the eastern part of the continent. I know you have a lot less ducks generally out east. I was so excited to come and move to the prairies because there are just piles and piles of ducks here. I really highly recommend it. Okay, let's compare those ducks with the green heads. Got the mallard and the northern shoveler. The bill is yellow in the mallard and is black and quite big and spatulate in the northern shoveler. Body color, kind of gray with a chestnut breast in the mallard, and the body color for the northern shoveler, that bright white side with that rusty flank. We can listen to the calls again here. We got the quack, quack, quack of the mallard. I see Paul saying they are in the Maritimes. Okay, I was wondering about that. The Cornell map, not always perfect. And that suk suk call of the northern shoveler. Comparing those tricksy females again, those hens. So we've got the mallard on the left-hand side, northern shoveler on the right. And if you just take a quick look at those two, you can really see the difference in the bill size and the bill shape between them. For the northern shoveler, it is really a big honking bill that flares out near the tip, kind of like a shoehorn or a spatula on the bird's face. A lot more normal duck sized for the mallard. So, the hen is going to have orange with a dark center, whether that's little speckles or a bit more of a saddle. And in the northern shoveler, it's going to be orange and olive, orange more around the edges and olive in the center, but it's quite large. The speculum is going to be blue with that white border above and below, and it's going to be green with a white border above in the northern shoveler hen. Otherwise, they're fairly similar, but you can see that female mallard, like the hen, she's got this cooler head in regards to the rest of her body coloration, whereas on the northern shoveler, it's pretty much the same in terms of color temperature wise. It's not richer or cooler than the rest of the body. It all just kind of flows together. You can see the mallard, she's got a bit more of a nice eye line through the eye, and it's really, there isn't a whole lot going on the northern shoveler hen face. So those are our two hens today, and don't worry, we'll be comparing hens a lot every time we bring up a new duck species, so don't worry, we'll go at it slowly. Okay, moving away from the waterfowl, we have a very common bird in terms of wetland species, and that is the red-winged blackbird. I do love it when birds are named something like so descriptive, such as a red-winged blackbird. It really, makes it obvious to people what you're talking about. So medium-sized blackbird, and all blackbirds have these long kind of cone-shaped bills. This is true for orioles as well as the other blackbirds. It's nice kind of long cone-shaped bill. The males are essentially black, entirely jet black overall, with the exception of these nice red and yellow shoulder patches. And they can, flare them up, or they can be slightly obscured depending on how the bird is holding the rest of those feathers. So sometimes you just see a little bit of the yellow, sometimes the yellow is a bit more hidden, but do know that there is that kind of red and yellow shoulder patch, even though sometimes it might be a little bit hard to see. They often do these great big displays, and they're almost constantly singing. If you go near a wetland or a lake, you're often going to be hearing a red-winged blackbird calling or singing. So here's its lovely conqueree call. And they also do that loud see. It took me a long time to figure out what that noise was, because you'd have these conquerees going, and then there was just this high-pitched see. That is one of their call notes. I'll just play that again. Got the conqueree and the see call. So that is our male red-winged blackbird. The female looks quite a bit different, and this is, a stumper for a lot of people. If you just, are going through a bird ID quiz and you throw this one up, this one trips people up. So one of the keys here is to take a look. She's got this nice long conical pointy bill that is going to point you, that should point you in the direction of the blackbird family. She's going to be similar sized, have that cone-shaped bill. She's fairly coarsely streaked brown overall. She's going to have this nice pale eyebrow. There is a bit of faint orange yellow at the base of the bill, and some of the older females, you can sort of see it in the bottom left here, some of the older females start getting a bit of those reddish shoulder patch colors coming through. I don't know if it's entirely clear why that happens. I think it's thought to be some of the older females that eventually develop this coloration, but it's not something that you see very frequently. Overall, just kind of this gray and streaky coloration overall, and this long kind of cone-shaped bill. You'll often see them hanging around the male red-winged blackbird, so that can also be, your clue. You've got these red-winged blackbirds, the males around, they're really, really obvious, and then you've got this similarly shaped, brown streaky bird, same shot, same size, same shape, but looks a fair bit different. So that's a good practice to get your female red-winged blackbirds down. Go find the males and then take a look at the ones hanging out with them. They really are ubiquitous in wet, brushy, marshy habitats. And of course, this is a species that we have across Canada and the US as well. A bit more of a western species here, we've got the aptly named yellow-headed blackbird, similar size to the red-winged blackbird. It does have this nice black cone-shaped bill as well. The male's got this black body, but this kind of really rich yellow golden kind of head and breast area with a little black mask on. It's really, you can't mistake it. There's no two ways about it. You see this, this blackbird with this great, gorgeous yellow head and breast area, and you're going, yep, that's got to be a yellow-headed blackbird. They do have a nice little white wing patch that you can see when the wing is folded up, but especially when the bird is flying. But really that, that golden color on the head and breast is really, it really catches the eye. It is quite a rich color. And they're not very melodious sounding. It almost sounds like, you know, a bandsaw or something going. It is just a very interesting song. So there's an intro song that has a few intro notes and then buzzes, kind of goes beep boop wah wah. And then they have a snarl song that is just the extended wah portion. So I'll play that for you so you don't have to suffer through my interesting interpretations. Oh, oh shoot. There we go. It is just hilarious. So that snarl song, that kind of one that just goes wah, and they also do that kind of the musical one they call it with the intro notes. I'll just play that one again for you here. I'm seeing in the chat they sound like a robot. Sounds like R2-D2. In a couple of weeks, we'll go through the bobolink, and that one really does sound like R2-D2. It's actually incredible. Okay, on to the ladies. Gonna be, same size, same shape. Gonna have that long kind of cone-shaped bill, but overall it's gonna be, much more reduced. So she's gonna have a uniform brown body. This is different than the streakiness of the red-winged blackbird female. And the yellow markings are there, but they're greatly reduced. It's a bit similar to the male. You'll get a bit of yellow on the face, a little bit of yellow on the breast, and a bit of a black mask going. But generally fairly reduced, but again, you're going to be seeing the males and females hanging out together, and it's going to be pretty evident which ones are the boys and which ones are the girls, and that this is the same species because they really do have that similar, yellow wash to them. These guys are quite common in deeper wetlands with cattails and bulrush, and they're kind of semi-colonial. You almost never see singletons. They often kind of nest in loose association with each other in this kind of semi-colony. So you'll often get like a great big area full of yellow-headed blackbirds. There'll be redwings in the mix as well. Again, a bit more of a western species. You get them right on the edge of the Great Lakes, but really much more common out west. Okay, moving right along, we have our first rail, and this is the Sora. So rails are kind of like little chickens of the marsh. They get around mostly by walking around. They do a little bit of a head bob thing, and they're laterally compressed. So they're really good at weaving in and out of all those tight cattails and tight vegetation. So they sneak in really, really well. Both sexes look the same, and they've got this bright yellow kind of chicken-like bill to them, this black mask that kind of goes down a little bit onto the throat. Otherwise, they kind of have this cool kind of slate blue coloration to their face that goes down, washes down to their breast. Their backs are fairly streaked, and their flanks are also streaked. They have a small little upturned tail that's white on the back. And you'll find these guys especially out west, you'll find them in kind of most wetlands that have any sort of emergent vegetation. And they are incredibly, incredibly vocal. And they'll react to all kinds of loud noises. If you've maybe had this experience, if you're out near a wetland that happens to be by a road and you slam your truck door or your car door, you will often set off Soras going if there happens to be one pretty close by. So I've done that before. I've, closed the door a little bit too vigorously and a Sora goes off calling. They're just super, super vocal, and once one goes, that'll often set off a few others to get going. They've got two common calls, and one of them is called the whinny, and the other one is the perweep. And the whinny is really quite interesting, and it can be quite extended, and you can have lots of overlap between individuals calling at the same time. So here's the Sora whinny. So that's the whinny call. And their perweep is a much shorter call. So we have the whinny, and that trailing end can go on for some time sometimes. Paul is noting in the comments that they don't get along with Virginia rails, which is true. They can be quite aggressive towards them. And we'll play that perweep. Danica's just mentioning in the comments that she thinks she's heard these guys. It's always great to put a face to the name, face or name to the sound. It is, and they're definitely super, super vocal around wetlands. These guys are pickers. They'll walk around and grab little things. They'll eat aquatic plant seeds. They'll eat duckweeds and pondweeds. They'll eat aquatic invertebrates, especially insect larvae and adults. They'll also eat a fair bit of snails. They are capable of swimming. They don't often do it, but I have seen it on the rare occasion where they'll get out. Maybe they want to cross a deeper section of the wetland, and they'll get out and they'll float and they'll just paddle with their little feet going. It is really, really adorable. They're quite a handsome little bird. Last year on one of our walks, we actually got a quick look at one in Regina, so that was pretty exciting. They tend to lay a lot of eggs, and they actually will dump eggs sometimes in the nests of other Soras, just kind of, spread out those eggs, not having them all in one basket. But here's an example in the bottom left here of, they do have that laterally compressed body, and they're really good at kind of like all rails, or most rails, of weaving in and out of cattails and all those vegetation. I've mentioned a few aquatic plants, and I had this request last week. I'm still just building the slide deck for it. We will be covering some of the common wetland plants in one of the upcoming weeks, probably next week or the week after. Soras are found right across a fair bit of Canada as well as a fair bit of the United States as well. Okay, those are our bird species for the week. Now we're going to move on to our first of two frogs. We've got the boreal chorus frog. Just a note for those of you out east, the western chorus frog is nearly identical, and that is found in Ontario and Quebec. So this is a fairly small little frog. It's about 2 to 3 centimeters long, and you'll find this with a lot of the frogs we talk about. The body color of most frogs is really, really quite variable. It can be, in all of these pictures, these are all boreal chorus frogs, so it can range from quite dark, kind of a pale tan brown color, greenish color, a little bit of a mix of the two. So, the coloration is less important than, the markings on the body. And so for the boreal chorus frog, one of the defining features is this dark line that goes through the eye along the side of the head, and it extends down the side of the body. They also have 3 stripes-ish, or lines maybe broken on their back. So they have these 3 stripes that kind of run down the back of the frog. Again, these stripes might be broken, they might be quite spotty, but generally in kind of a 3 lines down the back of the frog. But really, that line that goes from the snout through the eye down the side of the body. And of course, frogs are, maybe a lot easier to tell apart by sound. And hopefully, if you are out near a wetland, there's enough thaw happening in a lot of places right now that we might actually have these guys active at the moment. I haven't been out and about in the countryside to take a listen yet, but a lot of frogs, have this ability to, burrow. Well, they do. They burrow into the muck in the wetlands, and then they'll just, freeze over the winter. And as soon as it thaws, they thaw out, and it is go time for them. So boreal chorus frogs, they sound like if you were to run your thumbnail over the teeth of a comb, that is what they sound like. So I'll just play it for you. So I'm sure everyone's done this at some point as a kid. You've got a comb and you're just running your thumbnail over it. It really does sound like that. So I'll just play it once more for you. This is a really, really common frog, especially in the prairie and parkland region. Another very common frog is the wood frog, and as you can see from the range map, it covers a vast stretch of Canada. It's a little bit bigger, about 5 to 7 centimeters, and it's got this nice dark patch behind the eye. It's kind of this like wedge behind the eye. There's a little bit of a line on the snout that goes through the eye, but if you notice, comparing it to the boreal chorus frog, that doesn't extend down the side of the body. That black patch really has a defined kind of area, and it extends like kind of to the edge of the frog's mouth. Again, it's another one that has quite variable body color. This one, it can have spots, it can have lines, it can be quite a bit more plain. So here we're more looking at this this dark kind of chestnut colored wedge behind the eye, that little stripe that goes through the eye. It sounds like it makes this harsh quacking noise, or like a waka 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 noise. Let's play that. It almost sounds like some sort of a duck quacking. It really has this kind of waka 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 noise. Play it again. This really is, for me, just one of the spring sounds. Oops. Disappeared as I was clicking. Oh, that is the wood frog. Okay. Oh, those were the species today. We had the Canada goose, the mallard, and the northern shoveler for our waterfowl. The Canada goose goes honk. A sound that I'm sure all of us are quite familiar with, and I'm always excited when I hear geese flying over in the spring. It's just such a nice harbinger of spring for me. Mallards definitely make a quacking noise, but it can be kind of generic, so you don't need to write this one to memory if you're trying to learn your waterfowl. The northern shoveler, on the other hand, has quite a distinct call, and it goes suk 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 suk. And again, both the mallard and the northern shoveler have green heads, but the northern shoveler has this great big, spoon bill on the end of its face, looks like a shoehorn. These bright white sides on the drake with this rusty patch really, really stands out at a distance. Other birds, we've got the red-winged blackbird that goes conqueree, and these loud C calls. And luckily, the red-winged blackbird is aptly named. The males are this gorgeous black color with these red shoulders. Same for the yellow-headed blackbird, quite lovely with its black plumage, little white patch on the wing, and this bright yellowish head. And it has a robotic-sounding "Only a Mother Can Love" song. And if you've ever watched them do this, oftentimes when they're doing the snarl song, they'll be throwing their heads back. It is just a hysterical thing to watch. Pretty hilarious. The Sora, a bird more often heard than seen, and very, very loud, and lots of things to say. Often does the whinny and the purr weep. And here's the purr weep. And last but not least, our two frogs of the day, Boreal chorus frog and wood frog. Boreal chorus frog, pretty tiny, 2 to 3 centimeters, and it has that dark line that goes from the snout through the eye all the way down the side of the body. The wood frog, on the other hand, little line through the snout and the eye, but this kind of wedge shape kind of ends at the very edge of the frog's mouth, so it doesn't extend down the body. Both frogs quite variable in appearance. So Boreal chorus frog, like running your, fingernail over the teeth of a comb. And the wood frog, more of the harsh quacks, the kind of waka 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 noise. And those are our frogs for the day. That takes us to the end of today's session. You can reach out to me at skatlas@birdscanada.org. All of the webinars are going to be online, as well as quizzes that have, some sounds and things to go through at birdscanada.org/birdscience/MarshWatch, or if you just Google MarshWatch, it'll be one of the first that comes up. You can find Birds Canada at birdscanada.org and all of the social at Birds Canada or birds.canada. We are a not-for-profit, so if you enjoy the series and you feel so inclined and are able to give a donation, please feel free to do so. You can do that at birdscanada.org/give. And a big thank you to the supporters who have helped fund MarshWatch and make it possible: the Manitoba Fish and Wildlife Enhancement Fund, the Government of Canada, the Saskatchewan Ministry of Environment's Fish and Wildlife Development Fund, SaskPower, and Wildlife Habitat Canada. So big thank you to all of them and all of you for attending.